All right, we're live. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lit Lounge. My name is Jodi-Ann. I'm a speaker and writer. I work at the intersections of race, culture, and health equity. Thank you, first and foremost, to the Lit Lounge sponsor and co-creator OneKin. OneKin is a mission-driven retail tech company that works to help small businesses and creators. So you can check out their marketplace. They also have a live shopping app, candles, cosmetics, jewelry, etc., all BIPOC-owned small businesses. And of course, you can find the Heartbreak Years and the entire Lit Lounge curated book list on their website, shop1kin.co. And so without further ado, I'm so excited to be in conversation with Minda Honey, who is the author of The Heartbreak Years. Thank you so much, Minda, for being here with us, and welcome to the Lit Lounge.
Thank you, Jodi-Ann. I'm really excited too. I've been looking forward to this for like months. Every single time y'all have promoted this on Instagram, I'm like, oh my gosh, when is May 8th coming?
May 8th is here, baby. And let me tell you, this book, it brought me back to my 20s so bad. So I'm happy to be in our present day moment right now, because them heartbreak years were for real.
Right. I don't know why I felt the need to live them and then spend a decade still there mentally to write about them.
So Minda, welcome to May 8th, 2024.
People be like, don't rush your years away. But I'm like, look, I'm ready for my 40s. I'm ready to have a solid decade between me and those 20s.
Yes. I think you and I are the same age. I just turned 38 a couple months ago. And like,
Yeah.
I've been saying that, like, I can
I'm
feel
a little older than you. I'm 39. So
okay, couple months. But like, I've been telling people that I can feel the power of 40 surging through my fingertips. And I'm like, I cannot wait.
Right.
So I want to start off, just give us a rundown, like tell us about the memoir.
Okay, so the Heartbreak Years are about dating in your 20s as a Black woman in Southern California. So I was with my high school sweetheart for six and a half years. And then we moved to Orange County to house sit for his grandparents and subsequently broke up 6 months later. So it was December. I was like, I'm not going back to Kentucky. Like I threw away all of my socks, like flip-flops year round, baby. I'm not going back. I'm gonna figure this out.
Yeah.
So it was December. Yeah, I was like, look, no, absolutely not. So I moved in with 3 dudes, and this was before the TV show The New Girl. So there was no blueprint, there was no framework for living with men in this way. And they were not here for my shenanigans. They were not. I was no one's favorite roommate.
You were not the main character in their lives. Is that what you're saying?
I think perhaps I was, and they did not appreciate that. That's not what they signed up for. They were like, "Ooh, she's a rice cooker. Like this will be great." Like they were not ready for Heartbreak Minda. But yeah, I moved in with the dudes. I joined a meetup group for 20-something Orange County girls and met a bunch of other women who were in the exact same place in their lives as I was in mine, where they had just come out of these various serious relationships that had seen them through their college years and were really just trying to figure out who they were and trying to find their actual match.
Yeah. There was this part early in the book where you say, like, after the breakup, you're like, oh, I'm not a girlfriend anymore. Like, who am I outside of being a girlfriend? And I've never been a girlfriend like that, but I could feel the like, oh, this is like an identity thing that's happening right now in the wake of the breakup.
And, there's this part of me that almost wants to cringe that was like my central identity at 22. But, I grew up in the South. I was a good Southern girl. So that was the training speaking, that you're supposed to go to college, get married, buy a house, have a baby. And so I was very much like on that track. And so to all of a sudden be derailed, like, yeah, of course I entered into this identity crisis at 22 because I did not have a lot of examples of what else a life could look like for a woman.
Yeah, and especially I'm assuming that there would be a lot of cultural and social support and affirmation, like, oh my gosh, you about to be a wife, girl, you know? And to lose that, and then that kind of place shifting too, is really interesting. I wonder if the breakup happened in where y'all are from, you know, if that would have been different versus the breakup happening specifically in California, like the role of
Yeah.
place in navigating the wake of this breakup identity.
I think it would have eventually happened in Kentucky, but we would have been 30 something
Yeah.
divorcees. Like so many people that like I went to high school with or my social circle are getting divorced in their mid to late 30s. Like we would have definitely been on that bandwagon, probably a few kids deep, a few kids that had not been enthusiastic about having, and that he would subsequently not be enthusiastic about raising and or financially supporting.
Yeah.
Do not think it would have been a happy household. But because we left and so many people in our new social circles were single and life was not oriented around being a serious partnership and like getting a ring on your finger, it allowed us to break up. And previously, because I mean, we had certainly been off and on, like we were young, but we shared the same friend group. So we were constantly being pushed back together. And, we're both children of divorce households. And so there's just kind of this uncertainty and like certain terror that comes with a breakup, especially like, we were living together, we had built a life together, that I think triggers that sense
Yeah.
of like lack of control that you experienced as a child, even though you are now no longer a child and have a lot more control over what your life looks like. There was just kind of this like reluctance to let go. And
Yeah.
because there were not a whole lot of examples of like what happens on the other side of a
Yeah.
break. And I say this in the book too, like he wasn't a bad guy. Like it was a nice guy. He was a really nice guy. And so sometimes those be the hardest ones to break up with.
I'm like, that's actually hard. I'm like, oh, damn, Tyler, like, this is crazy. And then you're like, I mean, I kind of get it though, on both ends, I want to start talking about the epigraph of the book. So I have a visual aid. Literally, I just wrote, damn. Also, I wrote this many, many times throughout the book, but like I started here. Okay. So for folks who can't read that, the quotation is the Colosseum beautiful because it's destroyed or because it's still standing? And so can you tell us why this quotation and what tone you intended it to set for readers as they begin your story?
I think your damn would have started at the title if they had let me keep my original one, because this book was supposed to be called An Anthology of Assholes. And,
Amen.
and sometimes I was the asshole.
That's real though. That's real. Yeah.
That's real. And that's realization that comes as you get older. Like, maybe I wasn't perfect in that relationship either.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they didn't want to have to market a book with profanity in the title. So your first damn comes at the epigraph. And that is courtesy of Shayla Sabri. Shayla quoted me in her book. And when I got an email from her editor, it was like, oh, hey, Shayla is going to cite you in this book, and like we'd love to send you a copy of it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's so great. And when I got the book, the part that she cited, I was just like, oh gosh, because So this is kind of like a long rambling story. So
Go for it.
So the very first person to publish me ever was like Kiese. And this was when I was in Denver. So, towards the end of my Heartbreak Years, I'm in Denver, and he had just released Long Division and How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. And I was like reading, I was reading those books and was like, dang, this man can write, right? And so I go on Facebook and I see we have mutual friends in common. I was like, y'all should tell your friend Kiese he can write. And they're like, you should just tell him yourself. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I knew you could like tweet at rappers
Yeah.
on the on Twitter. I didn't know that you could like befriend authors on Facebook.
Yeah.
Like my
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
hadn't. I was not cultured, unlike Jodi-Ann. And so so we became Facebook friends. And so after a minute, I was like, hey, would it be weird if I sent you some of my writing? And he was like, I was gonna ask you if it'd be weird if I asked for it. And so I sent.
He's like that though. He's so
I
what
mean,
a blessing on the
such a,
culture.
so, yes, has been just a true blessing to me, like every step of the way. Blurb the book, like just incredible supporter. And so the Gawker didn't want like that initial essay, but then they published an essay by this dude, just about how much he loves white women and, does not care for black women. Our hair is hard, like all these things. And I was like, yo, you can love white women, but you don't need to like bring us into it. Like we don't need, it doesn't have to be a menage a trois. Like, you know, like if you don't fuck with us, then, oh, I'm sorry. One kid.
No, oh, you can fuck. It's all good.
So I wrote this essay that like a rebuttal and they published it. It got a lot of traffic and, it was one of my very, very early pieces. And so I've certainly grown as a writer and also in my thinking since then. I think I made some point about like how I had dated every flavor in the rainbow. Like, so of course, 15 years later, Shayla quotes that essay in her book Field Study because she'd been dating this white man, and I had this thing in my essay about how like I realized that I really like needed someone to share my awareness but not necessarily my race, because everyone falls on different ends of that spectrum. Like, the black man who wrote that original essay, we would not have been compatible in a relationship
Exactly.
despite sharing a race. Yeah. And when this book arrived to me, I was like in my 30s and had really been focused on, just dating dating black men, and had been considering, since I lived in Kentucky, opening things back up to other folks. So it's, see where white men were, and
like are y'all safe yet? Y'all good?
Like what's going on? Let's be like dating white men in the Trump era, sure. So
you better.
But I have been contemplating it when she basically delivers my words back to me, and so I was like, this is so interesting because this was something that I held as a truth at 29, that somewhere along the way I had these experiences and really narrowed my scope in dating. And now, I'm broadening it at the same time that these words are coming back to me. And so I was just like so honored that she chose my essay as one of the ones to cite. And I really also just connected with, there were just so many beautiful lines in this book. And so there's that Coliseum line. And we really kind of needed to rush to finalize the final version of the book. And we were having some like issues going, like my publisher was having issues trying to like connect with her publisher to get it done. And then someone in the process was just like, the author can just like sign off on this. I was like, oh, cool. So I emailed her and I got this like out of office, like, oh, I'm on a 3-month sabbatical. I was like, no. But she emailed me back so fast. She's like, I have never responded back to an email so quickly. And so she was really excited and honored. And hopefully someday we get to meet in person now that I'm in Philly and she's in DC. But yeah, so it really, to me, it meant a lot to like, to get to honor this other Black woman writer, a contemporary in this way.
Yeah. What I love about that too is that it so connects with the epilogue, right?
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about friendships and connections and the richness of life that exists outside of romantic partnerships or heartbreak and all of that. And so I love that little nugget of a connection too, because like, look at these two authors supporting each other, elevating each other's work, and to honor that, that's like a secret way of setting the tone too. I love that so much. So thank you for sharing that story.
Sure. Sorry it was so long.
No, I was on a ride. Like, this was great. So I also want to thank you, like on recorded audio, for taking heartbreak seriously. I think especially those heartbreaks of the 20s that are just so your life for a lot of people, but certainly not everybody, but your 20s is so defined by dating. Right. And I feel like when I finished your book, or in the process of even reading the book, I felt like I was being unfair to myself for
Mhm.
not taking that era of my life seriously. And so I feel like your book was the permission and the invitation to consider who I was, what I learned, what do I gain from the many situationships that I was in, and how that shaped my life and who I am right now. And so, one, just thank you for that. And my question is if you can talk to us about your decision to write and publish work that takes singleness and situationships, and dating as a critical life stage and life experience.
Yeah, Kimon Felix, when promoting Dyscalculia, was on the Stacks podcast with Tracy and was like, where are all the books about heartbreak by Black women? Like, like,
Mm.
where are they? What's going on? And I was like, my book is coming. It's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, like, people don't. I don't know if is right, because there's so many, like, the rom-com industry is a success for a reason, and we're all like out here, dating apps succeeded for a reason. And so heartbreak certainly plays a significant role in our lives. But to make art out of that, for some reason, like, I feel like there's this disconnect. Like, we know it's important. Every pop song is about love or heartbreak.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when it comes to the literary community, there's this dismissiveness around it, around, it's women's writing. My work had been dismissed as chick lit. In my MFA, I certainly had straight white male writers who did not see the value in reading my work or, what I was doing, because they felt like it would have this mass appeal. And so that makes me less literary and less like intelligent. And I don't know, none of that really resonated with me. And also, like, I write nonfiction. I need to write about my life. And that was what was dominating my life at the time. That's what I was struggling with. That's what I had the questions about. And so I think every young writer probably goes through this, where you're like, oh no, I'm going to write about something more serious. I'm going to write about serious things. But,
Yeah.
your pen wants what the pen wants. Like, you can dilly dally and waste all the time that you want, but eventually you're going to have to write the truest thing you can write. And for me, that was to write about heartbreak. And as I lived this through my 20s, and then I spent basically a decade revising the book. And some of these pieces were really kind of written in real time. And so it gave me an opportunity to find this like grace and compassion and sensitivity for my younger self. And, the same grace and compassion, sensitivity that you can then give to other people. Like, you can't give it to other people if you don't have it for yourself. And so Danielle Buckingham, when she interviewed me about this book, she said that she felt like some of the reasons this book was ruffling feathers of Amazon reviewers is that I was shameless. Like, I'm not judging my younger self. I'm not ashamed of her. I'm not trying to shame her. Like I said, I was like, I didn't have a whole lot of models. We were getting a lot of misinformation around dating and like what a happy life looks like. So I really was doing the best that I could for myself in that era. And I know that those were the right choices to make, because now I have young women who are in their early 20s who DM me on Instagram talking about they found my book at the library, or their mom sent it to them, or therapists who work with teen girls saying that they're going to gift this book to their patients, because it creates space for them to also not be ashamed of who they are and like what they're going through.
Yeah, no, I felt that tone where you're like, okay, this is what I said, this is what I did. I didn't have the language for it then, right? I didn't realize it then, or I was so preoccupied with this, that, and the third that, I was misguided.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this like two elements of the book where you have the self who is experiencing it, and then the self who is reflecting on it. And I'm curious how you would describe that relationship. It was reading to me like my relationship with my big sister, right? Like, I tell her all types of stuff and she's like, she'll make comments, but it's like not judgmental. It's just coming from a place of, I've been through this before, this is part of a life stage. Maybe even, I think the second voice feels how I would want to feel with my nieces, like a cool auntie, You know, that's just like, yeah, girl, that's crazy, right? Okay, tell me. Oh, you read that on Instagram? Okay, so let me like,
Woo, hope you got that out of your system.
yeah,
Like, it's okay that it happened, but let's not continue.
like
Let's not let it
legit.
continue.
At one point last year, my niece, she's 25 now. She's on the phone with her girlfriend, her contemporary, and she just like got dumped, or her and her boyfriend broke up. And this is me yelling in the phone. I was like, "Girl, this is just the beginning. It gets worse from here, child. There will be many, many more."
This,
So, anyways,
this won't even be a major one. Like,
you won't even remember this man in 6 months.
these are the men I wrote about. There were plenty that did not make the book. Yeah, you know, my agent, when she reached out to me about representing me and had read some of my other work, said that it made her feel like she was at Waffle House at 4 a.m. having a conversation with one of her best friends, and she grew up in Georgia. I was like, oh shit, like she gets it. She gets it. This is it. And so, yeah, the book is your best friend. It's that big sister energy. It's the sisterhood. Like it's, you know, it's this like space where you can be vulnerable. I have the first essay that I had that went viral that like put my writing on the map was Women of Color in Wide Open Spaces. So after my MFA program, to decompress from the toxic whiteness of MFA programs, I was like, oh, I'm going to go on this road trip to the national parks and like be in nature. And then I forgot like the great outdoors also has a white supremacy problem.
Yes, it does. I've worked in the outdoor industry. They are so
What industry
toxic.
Haven't you worked in?
I've had 8 careers, I promise you.
I'm gonna launch a podcast and it's just gonna be 8 episodes about Jodi-Ann. Because we're gonna get to the bottom of this. Yes. I don't want any more mysteries. Every week it's a new Jodi-Ann fact. And I'm like, what?
You're like, wait, what? Yes, outdoor industry is wild.
She's secretly 103 because she done lived all these lifetimes. And we're about to live a lifetime together. Like I know we have a big adventure on our horizon. So
I know.
Anyways, I realized, you know, there's a lot of racism out there, but one of the last stops on my road trip was a stop in Lincoln, Nebraska with one of my friends who had just moved from California back home to Lincoln, Black woman. And so I realized that I couldn't escape into the great outdoors, but that Black women can always retreat into the spaces that we hold for each other. And so that's really the work that this book is doing, I feel like.
I'm going to just let that sit. Like, I want people to realize what you just said, that Black women can always retreat into each other. And like that relationship, it doesn't matter where you are. You got a good sis with you, you're safe, you're okay. And so I love even seeing you being that for yourself, right, as you're writing the book. I'm curious though in the process, because I've kept journals since 2008, and I could not even imagine going back and reading the types of shit that I was dealing with during those years. So what was the process of like working with your own archive, right, and establishing that voice?
That's a great question, because one of the things that frustrates me about me the most as a writer is that I'm terrible at journaling. I just am not consistent. Like, you know, I wish I could pick it up as a habit, like flossing daily, journaling daily is like just really great hygiene for a writer. And I struggle. I don't know why, but I just like really struggle with it. However, I am, or at one time was a very prolific poster on Facebook. This was also the era in which we sat at work and wrote our friends' 5,000 word emails.
Yep. I was part of that.
Right? You're like, I got some gems in my Yahoo account.
Yep.
Back when we still put underscores in our email addies. So I was able to go back through those lengthy emails. Like that's the only reason that Yahoo account has not been obliterated, is that I needed to review those email addresses. Facebook, the timeline feature that allows you to go back and do like different searches was very helpful. I've also archived a lot of my text message exchanges with certain gentlemen. So I was able to reflect back on that. one of the most excruciating processes of the self-archive was that when I was in high school, I would swap a notebook back and forth in between classes with one of my high school besties. And so I reached out to her because I had a few of the notebooks, but she had most of them, to like give them to me. And I went back through them because I, had met my high school sweetheart in high school. And so in my mind, I had always like just loved this boy so much and just worshipped at his feet. And that was not so. Like I was not the case. Like I had note after note about like, oh my gosh, he's like a little puppy dog. He wants to date me, but I want to date boys with cars and money and like take me places. I don't want to be like his skateboard, or
yeah, that's
I
so
only
real.
go out with him because his locker is more conveniently located than mine. And like
I love this.
Just the word. Like I was just kind of so blah about this boy. I really just was like,
wow.
And then we dated 6.5 years. And so that was a really great reality check. And it was very humbling. And it made me like investigate further. Like, well, what else could I be misremembering about my contributions to this relationship? And so that's why in the book, you'll see like it does this little shift where I'm like so heartbroken, because I mean, don't get me wrong, he made some missteps, but I'm so heartbroken. But then as we get further and further into the breakup, you see me kind of like being like, well, there was that time that I met that really hot Puerto Rican soldier and broke up my boyfriend so I can make out with him, and then realized he smoked, so got back with my boyfriend.
Yeah.
Like the next day, like all that transpired in a weekend. So it's like, maybe I was not always the greatest girlfriend. So that's some of the self-archive. And then also one of the other meetup groups that I joined, in addition to the 20-something Orange County girls, was a writing group. And I was like decades younger than anyone else in this writing group. I was the only Black person. And I would come in and be like, me and my boyfriend broke up and I want to die, Philip just wants to write his Socratic method essays or whatever. I know that group hated me. They probably disbanded because of me. But so some of these pieces I wrote in real time. And so I was able, when I was putting the book together, able to like look back and be like, ooh, this is cringy, but this is a great detail. Like I forgot about this or that. So
yeah, I appreciate that vulnerability, because I think that is also an example of you taking that time seriously, right? Like this is who I was then, right? Like, and I would be hard pressed to find a 20-something-year-old who wasn't like that, right?
Right.
And so I appreciate you putting that on the page, because I remember there's this one line where I realized like, okay, we're doing something different here. Like we're cooking with gas with this book, because when you were talking about something with Tyler and you said a good girlfriend would have done this, but I didn't do that. And I was like, dang, okay.
Yeah, that was when he wanted to go to Disney every night after work.
You're like, bro, you work here. Why are we back here?
You would never catch me. You would never. I would never. And like, yeah, so it's just like, oh my God. Like it was just, we had outgrown the relationship and we were leading drastically different lives. And we just need to break up, and we just didn't know how to do that at that age, and that you could break up and that nobody has to be the villain, or it doesn't have to be this super dramatic thing. It can just be like, this is the truth of the matter. We just didn't know those things. And when I look at our lives now, like I went on to like have this, life of the written word and like all of these things. And he does stunts on stilts at music festivals around the world. Like we're leading very, very different lives, but lives that are very well suited to our passions and our interests. And I am so happy that he can have that life, because he would not have been able to have that life with me. That would not be an existence I would have been down for. I don't want to live in an RV with you and your dog for 6 months. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But there are people who do. And he would not have wanted to like go to readings or listen to me at dinner, be like, oh my God, I just made Facebook friends with Kiese.
It's so funny. I was just Jenny, who's the co-founder of Onekin, who's in the background right now, was on the phone with her yesterday, and I was like,
Emphasis on the co-founder.
but yes, emphasis on the co-founder of Onekin, who's with us in the background right now. But I was on the phone with her yesterday, and I was like, I think about my life and all the things that I've done in my career now, and I think a large part of who I am today is because I've been single, right? Because I didn't have to invest any of that energy into supporting someone else's dreams.
Right.
I didn't have to make any compromises. Like I could really, and it doesn't mean that it's easier, but because you have to do the work to figure out what do you want?
Yes.
Like what do you actually think is a good life? And when you have to define that on your own, you can't blame nobody else. Like it really is just you. And so I don't honestly think that I would have been able to articulate that in that way without reading your book.
Yes.
And so thank you for that.
Yeah, because I get into that in the epilogue. I say, like, well, what age would I, like, if I were to seriously have been partnered again at like 29, everything that happened to me after that likely would not have happened or would have looked very different. Would I be willing to give up all those experiences?
Yeah.
And I also talk in several chapters about how like I had dated these men because they were like these like portals into the sort of life that I wanted but didn't know that I could have or could even ask for. Like, I dated 3 jobless, carless, homeless rappers, and after I decided to dedicate my life to writing, I suddenly had no desire to date those men anymore because I was like, oh wait, you can be an artist and keep your rent paid? Look at that. So, but I was so drawn to these people that were like just making everything about their art and like irresponsible in every other way of their life because I was so stifled working for corporate America selling mop buckets.
Okay, so I need to know this. And I don't this is such a minor detail. Do you mean mop buckets like a generalization, or are you meaning like, oh no, this company sold mop buckets?
Oh no,
like,
this company sold mop buckets. They're the number 1 mop bucket manufacturer in the world, and I was their number 7 sales rep that year, top in my region. So I was quite literally selling more mop buckets than
I love that. Because like I always say widget making, right? Because that's what you learn in economics. And you're like, so I was like, oh, I wonder if mop buckets are just like widgets. You're like, no, I mean,
no, baby, I was a Jan San queen. Okay. All right. You go to a game at the Denver Broncos stadium. I sold them those trash cans. All right. You go to the hospital and they're cleaning your room with microfiber. I taught them how to start in the furthest corner and work their way back and use different towels for the walls than they used for your Nana's bed railing. Okay. That was me.
Yes. Okay. So, all right. That's a great segue into this question because like we've been talking about Tyler and the relationships and stuff, and we will get to some of these men, but because we have to. But your book does open with a heartbreak of a different kind, right? Being pushed out of a job, figuring out this like one major milestone of adulting, which is establishing your career, and doing so at the height of the Great Recession. I graduated in 2008. Yep. And so I know the heartbreak of like, oh, I went to a fancy school. So like, here goes a fancy job, fancy career, fancy life. And they're like, bitch, please. Right. So I'm curious like how that heartbreak impacted your sense of self-worth and decision-making in your 20s. And, what are the particular moments that you explored in the book that led you to the other side of that type of heartbreak?
That wasn't even a thread that I realized was present in the book until I finished until I was like revising the first full draft of the manuscript and like getting it ready for the second draft. And I was like, oh, wait, like this is a thing. And I was like, and this is a thing because I graduated in 2007. And so, just like dating was so impacted by what was happening politically with Obama and like identity and consent and like how I felt about myself and what was happening around employment because of the Great Recession, like it went beyond my personal experience to this much larger narrative. And so when I connected the dots on that, it was perfectly bookended with my move to California and my leaving of Denver, of, you know, being pushed out of this role and then being in this position with, like, you know, this older white man trying to tell me I didn't deserve the credit for this major sale, those Denver Broncos trash cans. And, you know, that like I need to be more humble when the world was telling women to lean in. And so the way I reacted in that situation and how that impacted me and my, like, how I saw myself versus how I responded in my 20s when I was pushed out of a role were completely different. Like, you could very much see how I had grown as a person and became more secure in who I was and what I'm capable of. And I don't know that there's probably a single Black woman out there that hasn't had this workplace experience. And so, you know, I have personally spoken to so many and been like, you know, it's not you. It's, you know, and you can't let these people break your heart because they were never worthy of it in the first place.
Yeah.
So we see that at the beginning. And, you know, I went to state school. I had this internship that I also kind of just like stumbled into because I got into this huge blow up argument with the editor at my college newspaper. He said something so misogynistic that I was like, I've had it, and just like got up from my desk and walked out. And he was like, you'll never write in this town again. So dramatic.
So dramatic.
So dramatic. I went back to my dorm room. I opened up the paper to the jobs section and saw that, you know, the company was hiring a global corporate communications intern. I was like, whoa, that could be me. And I sent in my resume with my email address at the top. At the time, it was like soaked in cinnamon at hotmail.com, because there's this song I loved and the hook was soaked in cinnamon. I was unaware that if you
very
don't
much
know
for the
that
time
song, that it sounds like I am a stripper. So it did not occur to me that the email address you put on your resume should be your first name dot last name at a respectable platform. So I sent in my little soaked in cinnamon resume. I went and interviewed, and my clips from the college paper were all wrinkly. And my manager was like, you know, you should make copies of these. So then they're like, you know, I was like, oh, thanks for the tip. And so when they called back to offer the internship, and this was something that I did not learn until I had already been on the job for months. We were like having lunch, and one of our managers was saying, because I split the internship with a person I'm still close friends with today. And he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we found you two. Y'all are so wonderful. He's like, we were really going through it with these interviews. He's like, one girl, I called her back and her voicemail was like this rap song about her smoking weed in the work parking lot. And I was like, that was my voicemail at that very moment when he was telling me that story, because I had worked for Decker, which was this scam college that got shut down because they were teaching people how to become carpenters and HVAC technicians on the internet. And really what they were doing was stealing people's Pell Grants. I was not aware of this. I also never got anyone enrolled. So, but no, they literally got like the phones tapped. They were shredding documents. The Board of Education shut this place down.
Jesus.
But they paid like a really high, like hourly wage for basically working at a call center. So there's just like a lot of people of color. We were all just like working there. And so one day we're like in the parking lot on our 15, and this dude was doing these raps for people's voicemails. I was like, oh, I want one. I was not smoking weed in the company parking lot, but had no qualms with somebody setting that impression of me and making it my voicemail. So what happened was, though, when they called and he got that voicemail and he was like, oh no, not her. He hung up, called somebody else. I was in the shower, saw I had a missed call, called him back. And because he called so many people, he didn't realize I was the one.
It was you.
Yeah.
Also, I also had a rap for my voicemail, but very much of the time. So
it was of the times, but you know, so I'm just saying I was rough around the edges, and I really got polished in this internship. to the degree that the director of our business, when they were recruiting for this commercial leadership development program, our communications leadership development program, they only recruited from the top 3 communications universities in the nation. And I had not attended one of them, but I did so well at my internship that I was given the opportunity to interview. And me and my co-intern, we both made the program. We're the only 2 people of color to make the program. She did not go because she couldn't afford to live in Connecticut on the paltry salary that they were offering. And I quit within my first rotation because of my racist manager.
Yeah.
And so you could just see very clearly how it is that despite Black women being the most educated demographic in this country, we were pushed out of these opportunities at every stage. And at every stage, we have to weigh like our mental health and our financial stability. You know, like those are constantly at war, at odds with each other. Even when I left my mop bucket job to go to grad school, they were like, well, if you weren't going to grad school, would you still work here? I was like, well, no. And they were like, why not? I was like, because there's literally no Black woman in this company with a role higher than the one I'm currently in. And I'm just a salesperson. And they were like, oh, well, you know, we're building a pipeline. I was like, but why? Like, there's so many educated Black women. Like, why doesn't your company have a single Black woman CEO? Like, or executive of any sort? Like, why is that? This big ass global company.
Yeah.
And she never answers.
And I think you can get tripped up because you're fed with like, oh, you could be the first, and you know it's up to you, and people are looking to you. And I think the fact that your book ends with these 2 like massive workplace instances of racism, you can only really control how you respond, what narratives you're going to believe in, and what you know about yourself, because what you're talking about happening in like 2008 is happening right now still, right?
Sure.
And so how do you fortify yourself against that heartbreak? Well, you have to figure out why your heart's in this like that, you know? And so I really did appreciate the representation of that, because we were attacked on every front.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm
it's
attacked
really
in the
tough,
workplace, and then I don't got a boo to come home to like vent to. Like,
and to your point though, you could have a boo to come home to and vent, and he's just like, whatever. You know, just because you have somebody doesn't mean you're even getting that type of support where they can understand what's going on with you.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get into some of these dudes. I have a lot of other questions, but let's get a little spicy first, and then we could talk about some other stuff. But I need to talk about Chevy.
Okay. Yeah, Chevy.
Tell us who this man is and why men like him are so hard to let go of.
Oh gosh, the joke with Chevy's name was that it was going to be that, like, there's that scene where I look at his wallet and I see his like last name after knowing him all this time. His last name was going to be Tahoe. And I was going to be like, why is this man's name so ridiculous? But I ended up cutting it because, you know, sometimes as a writer we get carried away with ourselves.
Yeah,
I think there's a couple of things happening here. One, we're fed this fantasy, this myth that like if you have this like sort of like kismet kind of meeting or spark with someone, or they're just like really, really good in bed, that like it is meant to be, and that the 2 of you at some point are going to get over your fuckery and you're going to figure out a way to like be together. Like, we are fed this myth that eventually you get out of your system, you grow up, and you get together with each other. The other thing about someone like this too is that they don't hold you accountable in any kind of way. So like, you are just allowed, they give you so much permission to be the worst version of yourself. Like, you're never going to have to be any better than what you are if this is the type of person that like you're dating. Like, because they're not going to ask more of you because they don't want you to ask more of them.
That part.
Yeah. And at some point we have to get real honest with ourselves that like, oh, wait, if I want better partnership, then I have to start with like a better person, and like I have to be a better person. I have to bring better into the connection, Like that's why, the queen of drunk dialing had to take her crown off, because if I wanted like the type of partner who wants to build a life together, this is probably not the type of person who is going to take kindly to 5 a.m. drunk phone calls. Like
Yeah.
those things don't go hand in hand often. I mean, maybe he's out there, but the odds are that I'm gonna have to be like a little less messy to
Yeah.
get what I want.
And I think it takes time to, like, when you have that person you could just call on your birthday being like, yo, come over, it's 2
Yep.
a.m., like, let's get it in. And you can just keep calling them at 2 a.m. to be like, come on, let's get it in. At some point, you're just like, damn, do I want that? Like, that's
Right.
not like, it starts to feel like reliability and support and care. And you're just like, oh, wait, but it's literally none of those things.
It's none of those things. It's just that very quick hit, like to stroke your ego in that moment. But there's nothing sustainable long term there. You're gonna end up feeling way worse on like the other side of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are guys like Chevy. And at some point, like in my 30s, I just kind of realized that like your life becomes so great and there's so many wonderful things in it that there's like the stakes just become too high to have someone like that in that life,
Yeah.
So, and I just realized that like, I had grown up and my life had changed in a lot of ways, but his life was exactly the same. He's exactly the same person operating in the exact same ways as he had since we met. The only difference was that like he had found at the time we were both in our 20s, and now he had found, a 20 something to continue these 20 something
Yeah.
things with. And
Yeah.
that person just could no longer be me, fortunately.
This is, I have to say this because the thoughts are in my head, but I know it's a little taboo. It's too late. It's too late. I just gotta say it. It's kind of
Same.
like, it's kind of like the Taylor Swift of situationships,
Mm,
because I heard someone say that like Taylor Swift always makes music for a 15-year-old.
yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what life stage she's in, she's creating music for people who are always kind of entering this phase. And so there is always going to be people. And so I could think about guys who have that approach where you can always find like a 20-something-year-old who's going to play with you, right?
Right,
And as
exactly.
they kind of mature out, then you can just find another batch and just kind of keep it going. And men can do that in ways because, it doesn't take much for someone to just like to get someone's attention and have them hooked for these very little things that you're asking them for.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah.
not like I'm calling myself out or anything, but so okay. So I want to move on to Keon, because I feel like your insight on that relationship was so spot on. I also think it's important to note that the insight comes, but the behavior doesn't change. The behavior doesn't change, right? And I think that's also part of your 20s where you realize like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this anymore, but you're so habituated to the
Mhm.
kind of fuck shit that you just kind of keep it going. But you write here on page 125 for people who are following along is that it can be easy to think you're falling in love with someone when really you're falling for the glimmers of your possible self you see in them. Ugh.
Yes.
So, what would you suggest, like, in teasing through these early relationship situationships and like finding the gems of learning versus the frustration of like, "Ugh, I just wasted so much time? Like, how did you approach deriving so much meaning from seemingly meaningless relationships slash situationships?
Well, so I get questions about the guys and like what they thought about me writing about them, and like did I have conversations with all these other things, and I'm just like, it's not about them. It
Yeah,
wasn't about them when I was in my 20s, and
facts.
it's not about them now. Like I never truly ever really knew any of those men. Like we only saw the sliver of each other that we were showing in our 20s, in an era of our life where we didn't really know ourselves well enough to even be like to show that self to someone else. And it's been 15 years. So really these men are just kind of like these blank screens for me to project onto. And so when I look at like, well, what is the projection that I'm putting onto the screen, then that becomes a lot more interesting than this guy did me wrong, he's such a fuckboy. Like, no, like, what was it that I was getting from that situation that caused me to linger in that situation versus because in any of these situations, particularly with that Keon chapter, those red flags came early. They came early. I could have left at any one of those flags and people would have been like, good call. And I didn't. I did not. I left sooner than I left other situations like with Chevy, but I certainly still let it play out longer than it needed to. And it was, and like, so it gave me this opportunity to realize like, oh, it's because I'm not applying to grad schools. I'm not writing. I'm not doing any of these. I'm not investing any kind of energy into myself. I'm saying, oh, what's wrong with my life? Why aren't I happy? And then focusing all of my energy on the one thing that I can't actually control, which is like whether or not somebody wants to be in a relationship with me and loves me, you know?
Yeah.
So I felt like that was a lot more interesting of a revelation than to like focus on all the ways that, you know, this guy, like in his shortcomings. And Keon, for his part, you know, looked really great on paper. And now looking back, I can see too that like, he was in this period in his life that was very hard and very difficult. And I was not showing up emotionally to support him in any way, like as like a romantic partner, or even just like a friend, or even just a fellow Black person with the like, you good? Because you know, I wasn't doing that work and yet expecting this man to like fall in love with me and want to build a life with me. I was skipping all of the reality in between like this initial fantasy and the like, you know, horizon.
Yeah. No, I really did appreciate that because it made me look back on some dudes and I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to be this person. But I think there were some of them where I'm like, I didn't even know really who I wanted to be, which I'm so grateful that I wasn't partnered young because I could have just so easily been like, oh, this is it. Like, this is what that means to have a good life and being a good girlfriend, a good partner, a good wife or whatever. And I had no idea. Like, I was just going to probably reproduce a lot of the both real and imagined relationships that I saw in my own life, which now I know would have been so bad for me.
Yes.
So bad for me. There's a chapter where you touch on colorism and desirability with Black women. And I'm assuming that that was a harder chapter to write because I feel like it's always difficult to see and talk about the privileges that we hold versus the struggles that we experience. And so could you tell us more about that chapter, kind of what went into crafting it, and at what point did you decide that you had to include it?
Yes, that was the hardest chapter for me to write. And it's so funny because people are like, oh, you wrote about your sex life. That must have been so hard. Like, no, I don't. None of that stuff was hard to write about and put out in the world. But like getting the colorism chapter right, not causing any additional harm, you know, being legible and like how I feel about this. And then just how necessary I felt it was to have this chapter, because I think it would have been disingenuous and inauthentic to act as if you can collapse all Black women's dating experiences. They're not all the same. And mine is very much different and shaped by the fact that I'm biracial, you know, and that's like fetishized, not even biracial, multiracial, you know. I was just thinking about this because I was like making this joke with a friend. She's like, when I say biracial, I mean like white and Black. I was like, look, I'm 3/4 Black, okay? Like I'm not even a biracial.
It's not bi. It's not half and half, baby.
Like it's dominant. There's a whole lot of oppression in this mix. It's fine. Filipinos got a heaping dose, keeping serving too. But yeah, so sorry, got distracted with my own inner thoughts. But yes, so to me, I was like, yeah, this would have been disingenuous to act as if all of these dating experiences are the same. I cannot remember the first time that I saw how people, I guess when I was in that colorism class, I saw how weird people got talking about colorism, because it's like when I learned about colorism, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like based on my experiences and the things that I've witnessed, like, yes, colorism, absolutely a thing. And yet I saw that anytime there was like a mention of colorism or discussion of it on Facebook, light-skinned people got real weird and like real in their feelings and real defensive. And so I was like, I feel like this is a test of my skill set as a writer. Like if I can write about this in a way that like we can have a conversation and that people aren't going to just shut down. And I also wanted, you know, all Black women to read this book to feel seen and to feel like I was being honest. And like I said, like they would not have felt that if I did not say, like, hey, I know my experience is different
Yeah.
because of this, because of these things.
Yeah. What I appreciate about it too, I remember being in my 20s, you know, in New York, doing what you do when you're single in 20s in New York, and a really good girlfriend of mine who's Black, but she codes as maybe multiracial, biracial, um, light skin, you know, that kind of racially ambiguous hair curl pattern. And I remember her telling me, like, she keeps going on these dates and they're like, oh, what are you mixed with? Or they think she's like half white or half indigenous. And she was just complaining to me about how annoying it was of how much they loved the idea that she was not 100% Black.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at the time, I just didn't have it for her because I'm like, it must be nice to be so desired. Like, I didn't really understand until a couple years into that. And like, I keep hearing these stories and, you know, evolving in my own development, being like, wow, that hurts you too.
Yeah.
That also hurts. Right. And so when I read that chapter, it was kind of bringing that like 20 mindset of like, I just want a guy to like me. And you got
Mm-hmm.
guys who like you for the wrong reason. Like, girl, I'm not here
Right.
for it.
Well, you know, I don't know if you've seen like that chart that's like the rings of support, basically. So
Mm-mm.
like she certainly deserved sympathy in her struggle, but
Yeah.
she should not have been asking for that sympathy from you specifically, you know? Like she should have like there are these rings and she was looking towards the wrong ring. So
Yeah.
there's that. But yeah, just like racism hurts white people too, and sexism hurts men too. Colorism also hurts folks who are like the lighter end of the spectrum. But I think also some of the, I guess, like the resentments towards folks who benefit from colorism is that there's this kind of like unwillingness to acknowledge the privilege. And it's like you can acknowledge the privilege without having to be apologetic about
Mm-hmm.
your existence. Like these are two separate things. And I can also like acknowledge this and like do this work and do whatever I can do while also not having to accept abuse from people who want to deny me of my Blackness because it doesn't fit into like these like clean lines that they want. Like, you know, and it takes a certain degree, I think, of like maturity and perspective to be able to suss out all of those different layers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really appreciated that chapter because I think, you know, there are probably ways that I benefit from colorism too, right? That I'm not even fully contending with because I think it's harder to see when you benefit from something versus when you don't. And so I just thought it was really expertly done. So I really appreciate that. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. So in this book, I wrote damn, 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 that's real, like literally over and over and over again. But another thing that I wrote a lot was men are so dangerous. Men are so dangerous.
Mhm.
And literally wrote that to men are so dangerous. And there are so many instances of sexual violence in the book, whether it be from crushes or lovers, strangers, even to our healthcare providers.
Mhm.
And so I just want, if there's, I don't even know if there's a question here, but I feel like it would be remiss for me to not bring that up. Like, yeah, we're talking about these little situationships and the heartbreak of that, but there are some scenes that are like just truly like kind of can break a spirit, right? Violations of your body, both in all sexual, right? But just like walking down the street or, you know, from a guy that you're having a crush on, or even being at the gynecologist. Like
Yeah.
men are so freaking dangerous. And so there's no question. I don't, I don't know if you
Yeah,
want to talk about it.
that's why we're out here wrestling bears instead of going on dates.
That part. And I am curious about that too with the bear man thing. If there's a difference between Minda in her 20s, would she choose the bear or the man or Minda now?
Oh gosh, I think Minda now is like, why would I even want to go into the forest?
That's real.
I got a cozy home. I got all the books a woman could want. I got good snacks. I got my string cheese here. Like, why am I even like taking myself into the forest? I don't think so. Minda in her 20s, if you've read the book, you can see I would clearly choose the men. Like there was, and that's a thread in the book too, because there's that whole relationship that I have with Henry that seems very bizarre and like perplexing. And then what I realize about like, and for folks who haven't read the book, so Henry and me around the same time as I met Chevy. And so they were two sides of the same coin. Like Chevy didn't want a relationship. He just wanted to, again, this was a time before Uber. So he just wanted to pick me up at 4 a.m., get me home safely, put me to bed, and then take himself home. And Henry did not want to sleep with me. He just wanted to take me out on these dates and have these like very romantic moments. And neither one of these men really wanted to commit to a relationship of any sort. And so for Henry, I found it like very frustrating at some point because I'm like, look, like, what is like really like, what is this? What are we doing? Like, I felt like I was on a TV set in like a fake kitchen that like looks like the real thing until you try to turn on a burner. And what I realized though with this relationship with Henry, because he did not want anything physical from me, it allowed me to be close to him physically, romantically, and know that I was never putting my safety into jeopardy. And in my 20s, because of the sexual assault that I experienced at 16, completely sober with like a boy that lived in my neighborhood, when I started drinking in my 20s, I just kind of like had this moment of like, I'm going to be as reckless as possible. I'm going to like wear the short skirt. Cause I think I had on business casual the night that I was like raped. I'd been inducted as the Beta Club president, and so it was like, I wasn't wearing a short skirt. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't out after, 9 o'clock, and these things still happen to me. So now I'm going to do all the things that they say women do in order to get raped. And so I wore the short skirt. I was like drunk, like blackout drunk in public. I was with men I didn't know. And none of those men raped me. And so to me, there was this like validation, like I didn't deserve this. Like I didn't, and I never deserved it. And I certainly didn't need to, but it's a trauma journey. And that's the one that I was on. So I was very much like choosing the men to like over and over again, like in the most kind of like convoluted way, affirm the fact that I was like undeserving of the treatment that I had received at that age. And as we near the end of the book, it becomes evident how difficult it is for women to truly heal from sexual trauma and move beyond it, because you're constantly being re-exposed, re-traumatized, anything from street harassment to like, a gynecologist who compliments your belly button ring and, wants to give you a shoulder massage, talks about your tits. It's hard to like overcome it because it's like, this isn't a threat. Like this is real. Like the danger is real and it's constantly reoccurring. So how, as a woman, do I like live in the delusion that allows me to leave my home and interact with the world?
That it like literally doesn't matter what age you are. It don't matter what you're wearing. It don't matter what time it is. Like, even in the safest spaces, like where do women go to really feel safe, So I appreciated like you including all those different threads, because that is real. Like that is the reality of existing publicly, as women. I have 2 more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so most of the men in the book are trash. There is one man in the book that I like. Literally one. That's my boy Francisco. Okay. So tell us about Francisco and why his actions were so important as a counter narrative to the 11 other men who are trash in the book.
Now, Francisco, you're talking about the man at the HIV clinic, right?
Yes. He's on like 2 pages. But I'm like, this is my man. Like this me and Francisco.
To be clear, I did not date Francisco.
But he is a man in the book.
He is
and my favorite.
He is a man in the book and Jodi-Ann's favorite. So I won't ruin the chapter for you all, but I end up in a hella silly situation, and I was like, I gotta go get an HIV test. I gotta go get an HIV test. And I grew up in Kentucky, all right. Like we had like abstinent, almost was very close to abstinent only
Yeah.
sex ed. And so like I like even when I was with my high school sweetheart for 6.5 years, like I was consistent all the way up in like with condoms all the way up until like I was on birth control. That was very consistent with birth control. And as drunk as 20 something Minda was out on these streets, always very insistent and adamant that these men use protection. And so this one time that I ended up in this unprotected scenario, I was like, I got to go get an HIV test. I got to go get it now. And like, I remember when I was working on the revisions for this book and I was working with some friends and they were like, you really went and got HIV, like over one instance of, I was like, yeah. They're like, you were that scared. I was like, yes. What are you talking about? Yeah. And then I looked into like the statistics and stuff. I was like, all right, people aren't being real with Black women. Like people aren't having real conversations about like what your actual risk is or is not. And so because of these things at that age, I was like very terrified. I was also very terrified of needles. And so I find this clinic in Long Beach that'll do a swab test. And Francisco is the guy there. And I'm like in his little office. I think I'm just gonna get swabbed and I'm just gonna read a magazine. But no, Francisco is like, it is my job to administer medical care. And this is for that care. He's like, I don't care that like you aren't one of the like gay men that usually comes through here, or the fact that I think he too thought that the fact that I was there was slightly ridiculous when we went through the survey. He was still like, you are deserving of medical care and information that had been denied from me in many ways. And yeah, like he counseled me and we talked about like, what potentially I would do if I did test positive. And he took me just as seriously and legitimately as anyone else that comes in that clinic. And he didn't sexually assault me or say anything weird about my body to make me uncomfortable. Like he didn't do any of those things. Yeah. And so what I realized in that moment was that as a straight woman, you enter into this pact that's this homophobic pact that like there is information that you do not need to know about because of purity culture. And that's a gay problem. That's for gay people. It's for gay men and whatever they're doing, right? Yeah. And so that pact that you enter into to be a respected woman and the one that you have to play in order to be sexually liberated, because you can't be sexually liberated and be viewed as like unclean or dirty because of the things that you're doing. So you can't be honest. There are all these layers of deception that you have to engage in. That pact that you enter into is detrimental to Black women. Yeah. Because then we do not get the information that we need around our risks and how we are like a growing category. Like, what we like the conversation around PrEP in women is like, extent. Yep. So yeah. And so as a like cishet woman, I think it's important to be vocal about like, hey, we need to be getting these HIV tests. We need to be demanding the information that we need to like stay like healthy and like make our best choices. Like, because otherwise, if we aren't doing those things, we're also contributing to the homophobia within healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so real. And I loved your call in to yourself during that moment too. Also, like one of my past lives, I have a master's in public health. So I was just like very excited to see about the nesting dolls of my professional life. So it was just really cool to see the healthcare scenes and to see it done in a way where this man is actually giving Minda, the character in this book, space to take her own body seriously, and it like to treat a body as like a system, right, that requires conversation and questions, and you're dealing with misinformation, not enough information, and all of that is
too. Class is a big factor, because that swab clinic in Long Beach was a free clinic, whereas my gynecologist was in Laguna Beach. She's the only one there. And so the information he felt that like Laguna Beach housewives needed was not was very different than the information that Francisco felt like someone
Yeah.
needed and was deserving of, was very different than the experience at the Planned Parenthood that was up the street from where I lived, and the treatment of the people there because of like, you know, their perceived financial class.
Yeah. And I find that it's so real that just like who you are, how you present impacts the level of care, but the level of information that you receive. And so when I was reading that, and I'm like, no, it makes sense that you would be worried based on the information that you had, but also understanding how vulnerable Black women are in the healthcare system, period, where, like you said, a lot of the things that impact us are not discussed, they're not researched. We don't have a lot of information, and yet we're disproportionately more vulnerable medically, right? Because, you know, Black women do have really high incidence rates of HIV. Like,
Yeah.
you know, Black women have the most aggressive breast cancers, right? Like, we don't think about like the specificities of like our particular healthcare needs because we're so marginalized within the healthcare system and just health information in general. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
It's amazing how many like of my negative reviews were like, oh, her body must be like riddled with STDs. It's like, did you not read this whole chapter on healthcare? And it's like, and just this whole like, yes, like you can be sexually liberated, you can have sex with as many people as you want without shame, you can even not always make the greatest choices because we're not human, and circumstances and all these things, and not have to like stigmatize yourself or be ashamed. But there is also this additional component of like getting healthcare and being like honest, like caring for yourself, caring for your partners in this way, expecting your partners to show you the same amount of care. Like all of that is all part of that mix.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I just want to shout out to my general practitioner, Dr. Torres. I remember one year I went, she's like, oh, are you sexually active? And I'm like, girl, please. Like, I just cannot deal with them. And then she goes, why not? And she's like, girl, have fun. Yeah, I was like, wait, what?
No.
And like, that's me and my doctor, you know, who's responsible for my medical care. She's like, have fun. Like,
my gynecologist, I have a new one that you know, I go once a year, but we met last year, and she's Black and Filipino too. And she's like, are we cousins? And, you know, she was asking like the get to know you questions. And she's like, oh, you put out a book. She's like, I'm about to order it right now. And I was like, oh, great. Now you're going to know me inside and out.
Yes. Last question. So your book ends with a happily ever after of a different kind.
Sure.
Not a relationship, but I think a new framework.
Yes.
And I am in love with this proposed timeline. So on page 212, you say, why can we normalize finding your person after you found yourself? Your 20s are for floundering. Your 30s are for figuring out. And your 40s could be for falling in love. And I was like, I love that. What was it like for you laying out these new expectations?
Well, I had a piece for Anscape that went viral and was like about Black women and the lies and the myths about like our singlehood. And so I had interviewed this professor that wrote about she wrote a book called like Black Love about Black marriage. And she had said that statistically, the vast majority of Black women who want to be married will marry within their 40s.
Yeah.
And that we are out of sync with our peers because a lot of Black women will have children in their 20s, and like things are just done out in a different order. So there's also not the same sort of concerns around like fertility or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, well, if this is already our reality, then why not just like enjoy the ride along the way? Like a lot of the anxiety and stress comes from the not knowing and feeling like it's not going to happen to you. But if somebody goes like, no, it's probably going to happen. It's just probably going to happen for you at 40, then it's like, okay, cool. Let me put that on the back burner. Let me do all these other wonderful things. And insider tip, doing all those wonderful things is how you meet people who are into the same wonderful things you're into, versus like trying to make a life with a person because y'all both liked getting wasted on a Saturday night. like y'all just have that 1 3-hour window in common, might not be a soulmate. And so
not 3 hours.
I don't know. LA, we
it'd be like that.
But yeah, so like So there would just be so much more joy, so much less anxiety, so much less stress. And for me, a lot of what I realized about dating in my 20s was like, I didn't know what I wanted. And I didn't know what I wanted because I didn't know who I wanted to be. And I didn't, once I did know who I wanted to be, I didn't know how to become that. And becoming takes so much energy, time, dedication, commitment, that it is no wonder that for most people that the vast majority of that work takes place like in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And and I don't think it's any easier for the folks who do partner early, because then they have to try to become in tandem with somebody else who is also becoming something else. So it's like I say in the book, like, regardless of what path you are on, you're never going to be insulated from loneliness or heartbreak. And so why can't we celebrate the joy that is available to us on the paths that we're on?
Yeah. On that note, on the note of joy on our paths, thank you so much. This was a joy to read. I appreciate you so much for putting this down. I feel like everyone needs to read. It doesn't matter what life stage you're at, actually.
Right.
I think initially I was like, oh, I should give these to my nieces. They're in their 20s now, but I'm almost 40 and I got something out of this. And
it's a great book for survivors as well.
Yes.
If you're going through it or you've already survived it, it's enough time to look back.
And so thank you for that invitation to just like take my own heartbreak seriously and all the different types of heartbreaks. Because like I said to my niece's friend, there will be many to come. But it's good to know that, I have a life that is not worth risking for silly things, and also a life that I want that raises the stakes for, whatever that partnership journey is like for me. And so thank you so much. Thank you so much for folks who are still watching, and get the Heartbreak Years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jodi-Ann, for having me on. This conversation was incredible. If folks want to stay in touch, keep in touch, they can find me at mindahoney.com and at Minda Honey on Instagram and elsewhere on the internet, but I'm most active over there on Instagram.
Awesome. Cool. See you on the internet.
See you there.
All right.